For me, the sound is fine. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is George Michov. I'm a web development instructor here at for Geeks Academy Miami, at our office in Miami. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm glad to see that so many people were able to join us tonight. We're going to talk about Bootstrap. Some of you may have seen it, some of you may have worked with it, and I'm sure that there's going to be some people that have no experience with HTML and CSS. Speaking of this, I would like everybody to do me a favor. It would really help us gauge the audience tonight. If you could just briefly post in the chat, in the group chat, how much experience do you have with both HTML and CSS? And you can do it in very general terms, like no experience, very little experience, or some experience. Okay, I see a lot of people with some experience. Seems to be the majority. Okay, very good. Okay, while people are sharing their level, I wanted to give you guys heads up. So tonight, this was actually included in our or updated in our invitation, but for tonight's purposes, for tonight's workshop, I'm going to develop a project on the screen for you guys. You're more than welcome to actually. I would love if some of you can follow along and code with me. In order for you to be able to do that, you would need access to Gitpod. Gitpod is basically an online IDE. If you haven't seen it before, it's very similar to Visual Studio Code. And the best thing about it is that you can easily access Gitpod with your GitHub account. So if you do not have a GitHub account and you want to be able to see the code in front of you, not just on my screen, then while we're still doing the introductions, go ahead and start your GitHub membership. If you do have a GitHub membership already, then go ahead and log into Gitpod with your GitHub account. And I already shared with you at the beginning of this chat tonight. I shared a snapshot of the Gitpod workspace that I will be in for tonight's project. I will give it a few minutes. You can still find it. Even if you just joined it, you should be able to still scroll up in the chat and see some of the first messages there. And Anna just reshared as well. So you can just go ahead and open this workspace with your Gitbot account. If you click on it, it should do most of it automatically. You shouldn't have to do anything except make sure your GitHub credentials. So the format tonight is going to be pretty simple. I strongly believe that coding is all about seeing things and doing things, not so much about talking and discussing. So I would just do a very brief introduction of Bootstrap, and then we're going to go into the project and actually see it at work as we go through the project. If you guys have any immediate questions, and those would be most of technical matter, if you're having some difficulty, reach out to Anna, please, or you can post your questions here in the group channel. Again, this is for immediate questions. Just shoot out your question, and hopefully we'll be able to help you, unless it's some sort of technical difficulty that is outside of our control. If you have other questions that are related more to the material that we'll be discussing, I would just ask you to kind of take a note of your question. And at the end, we're going to have a Q&A session when all of you will be able to actually ask your questions, and we can discuss a little bit once you guys have seen the entire presentation. Okay, while we were speaking, or I was speaking to you guys, I see that most people shared about their experience with HTML and CSS. Most of the people, some were little experience, which is good, but there's also quite a few people that have no experience. So I will definitely do my best to take into consideration. I will try to explain very essential things as we go at the beginning through setting up the HTML code, and just to have the skeleton that we're going to work with. And also, as we delve into Bootstrap, for as much as Bootstrap uses HTML, which it does, I will try to explain the different elements in it. So you would understand once we start using components and stuff like that, you would understand what it's about. So why did we choose to teach Bootstrap, not only for tonight's workshop, but also why do we teach Bootstrap in general as part of our For Geeks Academy full stack bootcamp program? The main reason behind it is that it simplifies the job of a web developer in three main ways. There's a multitude of things that Bootstrap can do for you and does for us, but the main aspects of it are one of three things. The first, and I would argue probably the most robust aspect of it, is its powerful grid system. The powerful grid system of Bootstrap allows us to have better control over our website layouts, which historically in CSS, especially before the development of the Flexbox module, has been pretty difficult. People had to use a lot of positions and floats, and the results were not always very straightforward or easy to achieve. And this is where Bootstrap comes to help us with its grid system. The second aspect of Bootstrap that is extremely helpful to us is that it provides us with some essential pre-made components, which are basically combinations of HTML elements and the corresponding CSS styles that we can use ready-made instead of having to construct them ourselves. And depending on how sophisticated the component is, sometimes that could really save us a lot of time. And the third aspect of Bootstrap that makes it quite important, and also the most important and the most popular front-end framework right now, is the fact that Bootstrap brings us a library of utilities or preset classes that we can use. And these are basically CSS or Sass classes that we can use ready-made again, just like the components. And by doing that, we don't have to create them from scratch. That really comes handy when we want to use a certain class only for one or two elements, when we're not going to reuse it. So instead of having to write lengthy classes that are then only used in one particular element, it's great that we have these utilities that we can just import directly from Bootstrap and use as sparingly as we need to. So that being said, I feel that we should kind of get into our project. I will go ahead and share my screen with project. You guys have, again, access to this project in GitHub. You can follow the link and open it for you on your computer. Okay. So basically, for tonight's project, I'm going to use this sort of boilerplate that you see in front of you guys. This boilerplate has obviously a README file, like most. And in order for you to be able to use it, you're going to need to do two things. Well, in this case, it's actually one command. So all you have to do is just copy this command here under what to do next. The colors are not great on my theme, but I promise you, once we start coding, my actual coding environment is much brighter, so you'll be able to see everything. So you can go ahead and simply run this command. We're using Python here, so it will mount your local server. And once you see this message over here on the lower right, you can just go ahead and open browser, and that will open your browser, where as we start building our project, we're going to be able to see the results by simply going to the browser and reloading. Okay, so that's all you have to do if you want to follow along with me. We're going to code, and every once in a while, we're going to check our results here by reloading the page. If for whatever reason your server goes down, all you have to do is just run the second part of this combined command, the python3 server.py. And once you run this, it's going to get you back up. So you'll be good to go. So for today's project, I wanted to show you guys how we can build a static, obviously not dynamic yet, because all we're going to do here, all we're going to use tonight is HTML, CSS, and Bootstrap. So we're going to build a static website for photo sharing. So it would resemble one of those social medias that are so popular today, where people love to share their photos and videos. We don't have a model in front of us, because I wanted it to kind of be a little bit of a surprise. I wanted to see the different stages and how we're going to get to them. I'm going to give another minute for everybody to open the Gitpod workspace, and then we're going to start. That being said, if you guys feel more comfortable, or if you're the type of learner that just remembers better, understands better if they simply follow visually, you're more than welcome to do that. You don't have to, it's not a must for you to actually try to code. We also are on a time constraint, so there's going to be a few times during this workshop when we are going to simply import pieces of code that are already written for us. So we can kind of fit in the time that we have allotted for the workshop tonight. we're going to be able to find these pieces of code under these versions of the index HTML file. As you can see, index HTML is your main file. This is where we're going to start coding right now. But in the other index files with the numbers, later on, I will prompt you and you'll be able to find like an updated version of the code at the corresponding stage of developing the project. So that is what we're going to do tonight. Okay, so on that note, let's start developing here. The great thing about Gitbot is that if you just type exclamation mark and hit tab, it's going to give you this nice little HTML framework. And that saves you a little time and effort from having to type doctype HTML, the head tags, the meta tags, the title tags, which I'm sure none of us really enjoys typing. So that's already here for us. Again, all I did is in the empty editor, I just hit the exclamation mark and tab. And the emit module placed the rest there for me. So now the first thing that we want to do is before we actually start writing our content, and as most of you know, the content always goes in the body, we first want to set up our project. So you see right now it's pretty bare. There's only the Unicode meta here and the viewport. There's not much else. So we're going to need a few things in order for our project to be able to work tonight. One of them obviously is going to be your Bootstrap imports. So we're going to go ahead and import the necessary parts of Bootstrap that we will need in our project. In order to be able to do that, we can simply go to Getbootstrap, which is the official documentation of the Bootstrap framework. And I'm going to share this link with you just in case, because there are quite a few different versions of Bootstrap out there. So by mistake, you may run into an older version. The one we're using tonight and the most current one is the 4.5. So when you open your Bootstrap documentation at getbootstrap.com, just make sure that you navigate to the most current version, which is 4.5. I'll give people a moment to make it there so we can then take a quick look at what we're going to be importing into our HTML code. As you can see here, under Quick Start, we have the main ingredients of importing the Bootstrap framework. You can actually do it in one of a few different ways. You can download Bootstrap, the entire library, and use it locally on your computer if you wish. For tonight's purposes, we're actually going to just use the CDN. In order for us to be able to do that, we would first need to copy this portion, this CSS link here, this style sheet link. You can go ahead and use this copy button. It's going to copy it to your clipboard. So you'll just copy this and you can go into your project and place it above any other styling sheets that you may have. So as you will see in a moment, we will import a few other style sheet links. And when we're doing that, we're going to make sure that we're putting those style sheet links after the Bootstrap one that we just placed over here in row 6. Okay, so just remember, I'm going to be posting everything after that one. Before we get to the other style sheets though, we also need to import these script tags over here, because some of the components of Bootstrap are using JavaScript, and in order for that to work, we would need jQuery, Popper.js, so we need to import the following scripts. Again, I will just hit the button copy. I will go to my project and scripts always go inside of your body. So what I'm doing is I went ahead and I pasted my scripts at the very end of my body, but inside of it, okay? You can see them right here. So your code should look something like this. And then we're going to need a couple of other things. For tonight's purposes, we're also going to take a look at Font Awesome, which is a library of free online icons that we use a lot for Geeks Academy for our student projects. I'll show you how to get there. The address is fontawesome.com. Very simple. I'm also sharing it on here you go. So this is your Font Awesome icon. In order for developers to use the icons, there is a free, like I said, there's a free section. There's about 1,500 icons that we all can use completely for free. The only caveat, the only request from the creators of Font Awesome is that you actually get your activation code. So in order for you to get your activation code, you can just request it to your email. For my project, for our project tonight, I will actually provide you with, you'll be able to see my code. Inside of my project, and for the project, for the purposes of this project, you can just use this code. I apologize. I was just looking through empty screens here for a moment. But if you go to the index.01 HTML file, you actually will be able to see the full setup, including the Font Awesome import. Go ahead and import it. And like I said, for future use, please be kind and just get your own code from Font Awesome. It helps with their marketing, and obviously they provide us a lot for free. So it's something little that we can do for them. Okay, and now we are on our way to actually building our first website. For those of you who have no experience with HTML, CSS, and building websites at all, what we're actually going to do here is in the body section of our HTML, we are going to type div so we can create an HTML divider element. And we're going to type inside hello world. We're going to save it. And mine is very tiny, but you guys can see it. I'm actually going to change the div to each one so you guys can see it a little better and see what we got. And there it is. You just created your first website. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. This was our workshop. I'm just joking. No, I have other things to show you guys. It's a slow start, but there's things coming up. Mm-hmm. You're not going to be able to sync your code to my code. But what you actually can do is, as I go through the stages, like when I just imported this script here in line 7, I told you, you guys can see the script in the file index.01. So if you all go to the file index.01, you would notice that it actually has all of the relevant code, including we just typed the hello world part. So this is where we are right now. So Sylvia, if you like, you can just copy this code and replace completely the code that is in your index.html file. That will give you the most up-to-date stage of the project where we are right now. So as I'm going through the different steps of building the project, I will tell you which is the next file that has the most complete version. And if you're behind, if you got stuck, you can just go to the respective file. Like if I tell you we're at file index 05, you can just go there, again, copy the code in its entirety, the whole thing, and you just copy it and you transfer it into your index.html file. You can save everything, reload, and you should be able to see most updated version in that point, at that point in time. Any other questions of this matter? He has a warning. So unfortunately, guys, because we have so many attendees tonight, we're not going to be able to address individual technical issues. I do apologize about that, but like, just try to take notes or follow visually what we're doing. And then later on, I will be able, at the end of the workshop, I'll be able to share with you the completed project. So you can just see the end result, and then you can like go through it and study it and see how it was built. Because like I said, over here in the files, we actually have the different steps outlined. So that's the best that we can do for tonight. Okay. Okay, so now let's go into the actual building part. All right, because the hello world is fun and exciting. We all start with it at some point. Everybody, whoever started studying development, most likely wrote hello world in one of their very first days or hours of studying. But it would be nice if we are actually able to do something a little more complete. So our next step is actually going to be to go to Bootstrap. And in Bootstrap, we are going to look for a component. So remember, I told you Bootstrap helps us in one of three ways. It has an amazing grid system. What's the grid system? I will tell you everything about it a little later. The next thing that it really helps us with is the components. And now we are actually going to take a look at the component that we can import directly into our project tonight, and you'll see how helpful they could be. Okay, so what we're looking for is called a navbar or a navigational bar. You know what navbars are, most of you have seen them. Basically on top of your page, the place where we keep most of our main links, drop-down menus, and so forth. Okay, so normally when you go to Bootstrap, you'll be able to see that they have a multitude of variations of the same component. It is important to pick a component that resembles as close as possible your need. Because even though we're absolutely capable of changing and tweaking these components by simply changing the code inside of them, they do come with a lot of preset rules. And that's why we said Bootstrap is very opinionated. So a lot of these components, or most of them, come with a lot of preset rules. And sometimes it can end up being very time consuming to start really destructure the whole element and redo it all over again. So whenever you're looking for a good component to use in your website, just look for one where you can see that it kind of resembles what you need. Okay. So for our purposes here, I actually want to have one that has a drop-down menu and a search bar. So I will go ahead and select this component, the navbar, which is, as you can see, first from the top. The first example from the top, I'm going to go ahead and copy the code. I will paste it directly into my project. and I'm going to save. And here it is. This is our website. Yours will probably look, it should look just like this. As you can see, guys, it looks like something that we literally just spent hours of building, right? It has your search bar, it has the search button. The button, as you can see, looks dynamic. You know, it changes colors and everything. You have a disabled option. You have a drop-down menu that we can use. And so it looks pretty neat. So now what we're going to do is in order for us to be able to use this, we need to move things around. So with a little HTML knowledge, you will be able to actually recognize the different elements in components that we're using. And so, for example, let's say that I don't, for whatever my idea is for my project, I decide that I don't need a search button. Let's say that my search functionality is going to work with simply hitting the enter key inside of the input field. So I am not going to need the search button. What we would do is we would simply take the portions that we don't need out, very much like this. So I went ahead and simply deleted my button, which I'm not going to need. If I decide, for example, that, let's see what the result is over here. See, the button is no longer there. If I decided that my search input field doesn't need to be in the right for our project, but it needs to be in the center, I will go ahead and move it between the Navbar logo over here and these other buttons. So I will go ahead and grab it. It is this entire form that holds the input field. So I will simply just cut it and I will paste it between the navbar and the home. So it's going to go right here. So in a similar fashion, you can move everything around. Like I said, each one of the components that Bootstrap provides us with is fully editable. You can move things around, you can change the CSS to it and everything else. You have full control over it. You just have to understand the rules that it comes with, so it doesn't become a little bit of a nightmare when we're dabbling with the actual rules and trying to change them. Now, for us not to waste any more time on moving our navbar around, what we're going to do is we're going to go to our HTML file, index.05. In the index.05, we actually have the exact same navbar component, which I just took from Bootstrap, already edited and suited for the purposes of our project. So we're going to go ahead and paste it right here. Okay, I will save my changes and we're going to take a look at what we have right now. Okay, so we have our navbar. As you can see, the original navbar was taking up the entire width of the screen. And in our case, the navbar has now become shorter. How would the navbar become shorter? I will show you right now. So basically, here we are starting to use a little bit of the Bootstrap grid system. So what the Bootstrap grid system is basically separating our entire workspace into rows and columns. So we have rows that consist of columns, and only columns can be direct children of a row element. And then if you would need to nest columns into other columns, you also need to put the nested columns in a row of their own. In other words, your grid will always go row, columns, and then another row inside of your columns, and then more columns inside of that row. So that is the sequence that you'll be seeing time and again. And all of these rows and columns, in order for them to actually function correctly, They all need to be inside of a container. We have two types of a container. We have a container class, which is what you see, simply container, and it gives us this sort of structure where there's some space or margins on both sides of your working area. This is the plain container. And what I will do right now is actually I will uncomment this. And this is a simple CSS style that I have put here, which would now add a border to all of our elements inside of our body so we can see what's going on. As you can see, the navbar is above here and it ends about here. So that is where our container ends as well. And you can actually see this border belongs to the container. The outer border belongs to the container. What's outside of the outer border is not part of the container, it's simply part of your body, okay? And if you want to use a longer container, one that covers almost the entire width of the screen, you would use the class container fluid. And what the container fluid will do for us is give you a navbar similar to the one we originally had used, which covers the entire width, as you can see. Okay, for our purposes, I actually want to have a container that is a little narrower. And then here, as you can see on the right-hand side, we have these little icons. These little icons came from Font Awesome, which I was telling you about. So what we can do in Font Awesome when we need an icon, we can simply go into the search area here, and you can search any type of icon that you may need. For example, just by, usually just a general description is all that you need. So in this case, for example, if I want to have an icon that represents my home button, I would go ahead and simply search home. And it gives you all these free icons that you can use that are related to home. And this is the one that I have used here. And now I will show you how I have used it. I actually went ahead and clicked on this piece of HTML code, which is very short. All you have to do is just click on it, similar to the code that we take from Bootstrap. And then I went ahead and placed this code right here inside of one of my links. The links came ready-made for us from the navbar from Bootstrap, okay? However, there was a word here before, home, and simply replace the word home with the icon that I imported from Font Awesome. So that is all that you need to use any of the icons from Font Awesome. It's extremely easy because we already have our script over here, which imports the style sheet, and from then is simply going to the icons and copying the code for them. For example, my other icon that I have used was a paper plane, or at least it looked like it. It's right here. And again, we do the same thing. Click on the code, it's going to copy to your clipboard, and then you go ahead inside of the respective link of the navbar where you want to place this icon. You simply just paste whatever is copied and you're good to go. This will end up giving you the icons that we already have. For right now, I will comment out this again because I don't. You can see the icons here. Okay, so here we have our icons. See the drop-down functionality of the navbar. I preserved it. I simply repurposed it. I changed the words here to profile, save, settings, and logout. So now I have everything that I need from this navbar. So the first stage of our project is actually done. The next stage of our project is going to include building the view for the photos that the members of the website that we're building are going to be able to use to when they share their photos, right? So we said it's going to be a photo sharing service or platform, social platform, so to say. And so the next step is going to be building the tile view where you can see everybody's images put together, okay? So now in this next stage is where we really can take advantage of probably the best asset of Bootstrap. And that best asset of Bootstrap is the grid system. We're going to take a quick look at the grid system so you can all understand how it works. So as you can see here, and let me make this a little bigger so you can see better. You can see here that the main structure that I was talking to you earlier is here. We have a container that would house our grid or our layout. And inside of this container, you have a child element that has the class type row. So inside of our container, we place our rows, and inside of our rows, we're placing our columns. And the end result of a piece of code like this is simply this element right here that you can see above. Here is a row that consists of 3 columns. And the grid system in Bootstrap is achieved by dividing the horizontal width of your screen or of your viewport, which is the visible area of the website that the user sees at any one moment. Bootstrap divides this viewport area into 12 bands or 12 slots, which simply go like this, and so forth. And they add up all the way to the end to 12 slots. So thanks to using Flexbox, Bootstrap actually is able to space our columns perfectly with very little setup based on this 12 slot grid system. So basically, let's say that we want to have on this row 3 columns of identical width. All we have to do is simply create our HTML elements with the class column. And by creating 3 of these, Bootstrap automatically made them perfectly equal in width and shape, right? So as you can see, we didn't have to specify any CSS whatsoever. We didn't have to put any additional rules. Bootstrap did for us, which is extremely helpful, as you can imagine, especially when we have much bigger layouts to build. So we're going to take a look at a little bit more at more types of columns so you can see what the columns can do and how flexible and awesome they are. Again, in this case, in this example, we have a container, we always have a container, and then we have a row, and inside of our, which is here, the first row, and inside of our first row, we're going to have 2 columns. Again, Bootstrap automatically made these 2 columns equal to each other. And in the second row, we have 3 columns, and again, Bootstrap makes them equal to each other. Now, what happens if we actually don't want the columns to be equal? How do we do this? Well, here's where the 12 slot system comes into in action. Because here in this example, you see in our first row, we have 3 columns, right? But it's easy to see right away that they are actually not of the same width. How is this done? We simply create the 3 columns, but we went ahead and for the middle column, we specified that the middle column is going to take up 6 of the 12 slots. So if we take up only with the middle column 6, or in other words, half of the entire width of the page, Bootstrap automatically distributed the rest of the space on each side of the central column to one of the other two remaining columns, right? Those two other columns don't have specified width. If you notice, Bootstrap is doing this automatically, right? All we have to do is just specify the width of the middle column, and Bootstrap took care of the rest for us. So as you can see, this is pretty awesome and makes your life as a developer much easier. In the next example, you see that we have a row that has 3 columns again, and the middle column is larger, but is no longer the equivalent of 6 slots. This time it's 5 slots. So you don't have to always go in even increments. You can use any combination of those 12 slots that you want to use, okay? And further on, there are many more examples that you can familiarize yourself with, and they'll give you a really good appreciation of what Bootstrap really does us. Where Bootstrap is really amazing, though, is when we start working with responsive content. And when we talk about responsive content, what is that? Responsive content is basically when we want to take into consideration the device or the screen size of the user who will be looking at our website. Because you guys know that in today's age, we have the most types of devices and screen sizes that we have ever probably had before in history. People are trying to access the internet and able to access the internet from a huge variety of different devices with different sizes. And it is very important and crucial for a web developer to be able to have their website visible from any sort of device, or at least for as many as possible types of devices and screens. In order for us to do that, we can use, again, the grid system of Bootstrap. And what the grid system of Bootstrap allows us to do is to actually control the size of your different elements according to the screen size of the user. So what does that mean? Basically, the Bootstrap grid system, I would like to show you over here, introduces 5 different size classes of screen size. So we're talking about extra small devices, which are usually phones and small smartphones. And then we have small size, which is usually tablets. Then we have medium, large, and extra large. As you can imagine, these are usually smaller laptop computers, and then desktop computers, and then large desktop screens, right? So we have these 5 different thresholds of screen sizes. And depending on which type of screen size our user is looking at our website from, we can actually manipulate or control how wide the columns of our layout are going to be at each size level. And how we do that is simply we add the breakpoint abbreviation, SM for small, MD for medium, and so forth, to our column designator class. Okay, so when we type our column class, we simply add these little breakpoint designators, small, medium, large, or extra large. And doing that, we determine that our website will look a specific way and have a specific layout at this particular resolution size. So now we're going to take a very quick look at a couple more examples, how this exactly works at the different. So as you can see here, we actually can have a row that specifies how many columns are going to fit in this row. And you see here that we're using the breakpoint designators, small and medium. That tells us that if our user is looking at our website from a small size monitor or viewport, this row is going to fit only 2 columns. And if we're talking about a larger monitor, then the row is going to be able to fit 4 columns in the same row, for example, because of course your screen's getting bigger, you have more real estate, you can show more columns on it. So this is basically how this works. And we can control also the width of each column in terms of how many of those 12 original width slots it takes at every breakpoint. So here, for example, you see that we have a column in this row, and this column is going to take up 8 slots, okay? And then we have another column, which is going to take up, for most occasions, is going to take up 6 slots. However, if we have a medium or larger size screen, this column is going to take only 4 slots and not 6. What does that mean? If our original number of slots width-wise is 12, that means that on a larger monitor, in this case medium or larger, we see that both of these columns are, one of them has size 8 and one of them has size 4. 8 and 4 add up to 12. That tells you that we'll be able to fit both of these columns on the screen. However, as the screen starts getting smaller, we are no longer going to be able to actually fit all of the columns. And you can see this right here. If I make my screen large, we can fit all of these columns next to each other. And as I start going smaller, you can see that the columns no longer fit all in one row. And what Bootstrap does for us is it automatically uses Flexbox and pushes the next columns below. So now from horizontally arranged, they became vertically arranged. But this is a desired behavior, and it's desired because we are not losing any part of our layout. All of our layout, all of our components are still visible to the user at any one time, regardless how tiny the monitor gets. Okay, so now this is what we're going to do in our project next. We're going to take a look at the file index06. We're going to go ahead and copy all this code, and we will simply put it inside of our index.html file. Make sure it's saved. Okay, so quick explanation before we see the end result. For this style view here, I have composed a grid, a Bootstrap grid. It consists of a container, like the examples that we just saw, and this container has only one row. Why did I choose to do one row instead of 3 different rows when I only want to fit 3 columns per row? I did that because I know that the columns actually get redistributed, and whatever columns cannot fit one row, they get automatically redistributed on a separate row. So I didn't even have to bother to create additional rows. A lot of developers would actually like to be more explicit. They would go ahead and place another row here and another row here. And because it makes sense, because you have each one of these columns is going to be 4 slots wide, and when you add 4, 4, and 4, that is 12. So obviously 3 of these columns present row. So it will make sense that you may want to put them in a separate row, but you absolutely do not have to. You can put all of them in the same row, and Bootstrap is going to do the rest of the work. So I was lazy and I went ahead and I did that. So I pasted my code here, and for this style view, I have used some sample pictures. First, when I was planning tonight's project, I had to do a project with photos of kittens, because who doesn't like kittens? And if there are some people there who don't like kittens, then we can all agree that they have no soul, right? But then I decided to be inclusive, so I figured I will include some other animals. So that's why if you're more of a horse person, over here, I have included a nice little horse for you. And if any of you are more of a sloth person, I found this very handsome looking sloth to include in our project. So now let's take a look at what we have built in our project so far. What we have here is the Navbar, which was already there before at the last step of developing a project. And on this step, we simply added this tile view. This tile view consists of 3 images on a row, and we have 3 of those rows. You don't need to use Bootstrap in order to put the images in a row, right? Well, we could do this before with just plain CSS. But the question is, what was going to happen if you were using plain CSS and didn't want to put a whole lot of work, and you actually wanted to change the size of your screen? Before Bootstrap, these images would be all over the place right now. And as you can see, now we can actually change our screen, and they keep changing, all at the same time, keeping their aspect ratio, nothing breaking, nothing's being cut off, and we can still see all of the elements of our layout. Nothing is being lost, right? In addition to that, you can also notice the navbar that we also took Bootstrap did this really cool thing where some of its buttons could no longer fit on the width that we had. See, these buttons over here decided they can no longer fit, so they simply got collapsed in this drop-down button. And you as a developer have a choice how to arrange these. You can arrange them horizontally under the button, whatever you want, right? I chose to do them like this just for fun. But they're there, nothing's lost, and everything is looking pretty decent. So this is how helpful the Bootstrap grid system is. We were able to do this right now simply by using the grid system of Bootstrap. As you can see, there is hardly anything here. We don't have to program some crazy CSS code or anything like that. All we did is just to make sure that we have 3 rows of 3 columns each that add up to the number 12. So 4, 4, and 4 adds up to the number 12. We paste our images, and then the rest is pretty much taken care of for us by Bootstrap. Now, in the next step of this project, we're going to make our tiles a little more responsive. And in order for us to be able to do that, we're actually going to build a single view of our photos. Because let's say that our user is happy looking at these photos, but they don't have any details. We can't tell there's no information about them. We can't tell if anybody liked them, if anybody left a comment or anything like that. So in order for us to be able to do that, we're going to next develop our newsfeed style view, where we can see one photo at a time that will take up a little more of the screen size. And the photos can have some details. So how are we going to do that? We're simply going to create another container. And that container is again going to have a similar row and column system to the one that we already have. In addition to that, we are going to need some sort of a component to hold our photo with all of the details that we want to add to it, right? So in order for us to see and discuss how this part is going to be built, we're going to take a look at the file index08. We're going to do our copy paste. And then we're going to discuss. Okay, so like I was telling you, I created another container. And my container now has, as you can see, something that has a weird class called card. What is the class card? This is just another Bootstrap component that we're going to find in the official Bootstrap website. So if we go ahead and search for a card, you can see our card components right here. And what is a card? Basically, it's this cool structure that has a field that holds an image. It can have some heading or title. It can have some text, and it can have some buttons. Okay, basically, it's a component, a Bootstrap component that holds images and different sizes text and buttons for us. There is a multitude of different card components, variations that you guys can use. You can take a look at all the different types. I actually went ahead and chose the most basic one, the first one over here, because this serves our purposes for tonight. So I went ahead and copied this one. And then, as you could imagine, looking at this card, I had to do a little moving around. So I did our moving around. And then after I created our code based on what I moved around, then I ended up having this. I reloaded, and now you can see under our tile view, we are having this little newsfeed style view. So I took the card component. I obviously used the image area to put the source code for my image that I chose. I put some writing here. I went ahead and used some more of the font awesome icons that you can find as well. And I placed them here. I placed some more code. And that's pretty much it. This is how helpful Bootstrap is with providing us with all these pre-made components that we can use with very little effort. Now, whenever you use components that will be replicated, for example, I want to create something that looks more like a newsfeed view, and right now we only obviously have one element here, one component. Whenever you want to use whenever you want to work with more components, or use a layout with more components, is what I was trying to say. It is probably a good idea to first create one of your components, tweak it to your liking, make all of the changes that you would need to make. And only after that, we are going to go ahead and replicate that component. Why do we want to do that? Is because, like I told you, there are a lot of rules that come with the original components. And once you start moving things around, the layout starts looking a little weird. And there are a few small adjustments that you can simply achieve by using some of the utilities that Bootstrap gives us. Those utilities, like I said at the beginning of this workshop, are classes that are already pre-written for us. They're pre-made for us. And all we have to do is just familiarize ourselves on Bootstrap. What are the available utility classes that it provides for us? And we can go ahead and use them. For example, it is simple. It is very simple to figure out that a class called P is going to be padding. And then if you would like to do some margins, you go ahead and use a class called M. So if you ever see M2, this is nothing more but margin 2. So if we add this class M2 here, it will go ahead and add margins to this element, to this div element, which basically holds some of our text in the card. So let's take a look. You see here how everything is nicely spaced, right? When I took the card, it didn't look like this at first. Spaces were not that great, so I had to use some padding, some margins that came directly from the Bootstrap utility classes, and I added them in the positions where I needed them. And this is why these predetermined utility classes are great for, is that we can use them already without having to actually write a class. And we can use them only in the elements where we do need them, because you would notice here that not one of these elements has the exact same combination, the same combination of classes like the other. That tells you that if I was to build CSS rules for each one of these elements, I would have had to write a bunch of different classes, and I would have used each one of these classes only once, maybe, for each of these elements. So Bootstrap allows us to not have to go through that, and we can go ahead and simply use the predetermined utility classes. So here's what we have so far, right? We have something that has a navbar here. It has these nice crossing buttons, and then it also has the style view that is scalable, like we already saw. And then we just created this newsfeed style view over here, where we can see each one of our pictures with all of its details. Like you can see, this picture was pretty popular because it got more than 3 million views. So that's a successful picture, I would say. The other person who gets more than 3 million views on a picture is Leo Messi, but that's a different story, the soccer player. So what are we going to do next? Next, we're going to simply replicate this component 3 or 4 more times in our code, and then we simply will substitute the source code for your image, which is right here in the middle section of your card. We would change this with the code to a photo of your liking. And what that is going to do for us, we are going to see in the next stage of the project. And so we go ahead and do the same, what we have done a couple of times so far. Okay, so let's see what we have here as far as code. We have all of our card components. I simply replicated my card components in my container. I replicated my card components, all their styling that was already there, that I had already put in place. So I didn't have to change anything after that. That made it much easier, faster. And then I simply changed the pictures. So let's take a look at what we have. And what we have here is basically a newsfeed style of our photos. Okay, where is this going? You may be wondering. Well, now this doesn't make much sense when we have all views on the same page, right? So now we're going to actually go ahead and take another look at Bootstrap and take a look at something called pills. Pills is basically just a type of navigation tabs in Bootstrap, one of the many components that Bootstrap gives us. So you can see here, scroll all the way to the top so you can see where we are. We are in the official Bootstrap documentation under the article for navs, which is for their navigation components. We have basic navigation. This is some code if you want to just have like a pretty simple navbar. Further down is where I'm going to go. And I'll take a look at these things called pills. I like them because when you click on them, they actually become active. This blue active background is added to the one that you're clicking. So that is what I'm going to use in order to be able to actually switch dynamically between two views. I'm going to have the user be able to see either the tile or the newsfeed view. So it would make a little more sense. How I'm going to do this is I'll actually scroll down a little more, further down to the bottom, and I will get to the section that tells us how to use components that include JavaScript behavior. And here is where things in Bootstrap get really good, because before that, when you're looking at a card, it had a pretty rudimentary build. It was mostly just HTML and some CSS to it. Maybe many of you were thinking, why do I need to use Bootstrap components if I'm just, going to use 3 divs and some buttons inside of them in an image section? Well, it becomes really helpful when the components actually have JavaScript behavior, because in this case now we're going to use, thanks to Bootstrap, some JavaScript behavior that we actually don't have to code. So we would have 0 JavaScript in our file, and yet we would have responsive dynamic behavior. Okay, so I want my pills to do something like this. I want to be able to click on a pill and a different section of my website to dynamically show and the other sections to disappear, just like this. So for that, what we're going to need is, we obviously would need to copy this code, which is the respective code for this component. And then we are going to go ahead and make sure to place the most important part, to place the containers that we already have, one for the tile view and one for the newsfeed view. We're going to have to paste all of our code inside here. Okay, and I will show you how this is done in a second. So we're going to go back to our code. Okay, and we're going to take a look at the index 10 file, index 10. We're going to copy the developed code that I have written for you guys. All of it. Paste over this one. And now we will see what we have here. Okay, so here's our code. And this is what we used. We used our nav pills. And for the nav pills that we just took from Bootstrap, I'll show you in a second. You see, this is the container that I have placed the nav pill bar in this container. And then here are our nav pills that we imported from Bootstrap. This is just the code that we copied. So far, so good. But then when we get to the part that has the class tab pane fade show active, I actually went ahead and made sure that this is the ID I chose for my tiles view, for example, and I made sure that it corresponds the href of the link that has that button for the pills. So these here, obviously, as you can tell, are your actual buttons, the actual little pills that we're using as buttons. And then below here is the corresponding HTML code. So when we click one of these buttons, they would show this piece of code. So I pasted the tile view first. In my first pills tab, right here. And then in my second pills tab, I have matched the ID, which I have named my feed view with the ID feed. And I made sure that I matched this as well in the buttons over here. And you can see it in the href of the second button. right here. So I simply matched the IDs and then I pasted the code inside of this component. This component came ready from Bootstrap. All I did is I simply pasted my code inside of the div element that came with the Bootstrap code. Okay, so this was done. We're going to reload and let's see what are the changes. And now, see, we got this from Bootstrap. These little nav fields over here that are now capable of dynamically switching our views without us actually having to use any JavaScript at all. Here's my one view, the other one's not visible, and then when I click over, the other one becomes visible, and my first one is not visible. Okay. So little by little, we are getting closer to our project complete. We are missing only one part if we want to make our project look credible. And that part is adding some sort of profile card here, right? Because if these are somebody's pictures, who is that somebody whose pictures we're looking at? Let's take a look. We're going to go to the file index 11 this time, which is the last one, the last file in the sequence. We're going to go ahead and copy everything. Back to the index.html file. You know the drill. And reveal time. What do we have here? Ta-da, we have a little profile card. This is who this profile belongs to. We have been looking at this account all the time called Real Funny Animals we can follow. And we can do other things here, and it has 10,000 followers. Not bad, not bad. That's a good account. Okay, so what does this look like to you guys? Does it look familiar looking at this project? Oh, I think actually we're missing one part. Let's take a look. What is it that we're missing? Okay, Navbar. I'm simply going to add a little class here that I've written called logo. It's in the code. And we're going to change. And here we are. Now the project is complete. You guys can see we are looking at Instagram. So in today's workshop, let's recap. First, you were able to build your some of you, not all, but some of you were able to build their very first website. And not only that, but now you realize that you have already also built Instagram. So congratulations for everybody, and thank you so much for joining. This was the end of our project. I encourage you guys to play with Bootstrap. It's an amazing technology. It has to offer a lot. There's only so little that we can cover in an hour and a half. The best source for any knowledge on Bootstrap, of course, as always, is the official documentation of the Bootstrap framework. You have the link to it. Also, one very good source is the website of the W3 schools, which we very often use as a reference point. Right here, you can search Bootstrap 4, and you will actually see some really good problems that are already worked out for you. And you can play with them, and they're dynamic. As you can see, you can go here, try it yourself, and just test the many different features that Bootstrap provides us with. So I encourage you guys to learn more about it. If you're already building websites, if you haven't used it, try to use it. It's really amazing. It could achieve a lot, especially when it comes to our layout and to our grid. At this point, I would like to take any questions if there are. Can you repeat the question? How do you get the Instagram logo to work? Has he copied the code that was actually in the file? Because there is a piece of code that needs to be imported from Google Fonts, which takes care of it. However, that was already done in the file. So if he takes a look at his index.html file in its latest, in its last version that we did, under line 8, he should have an import of a font, a Google that is called Grand Hotel. Yeah, it's this. Yeah, this part here is what will be able to convert your fonts to the actual Instagram font that they have used. Before we finish, I just wanted to mention to everyone that obviously this was just a peek into one of the technologies that we use at Bootstrap Academy, Bootstrap Academy for Geeks Academy. I just created a new academy too. During our full stack programs, which instructor at one of those, the education is super hands-on, and we actually go into a lot more detail with our students. We are side by side with our students. Our groups are very, very small. Very often we have 4 or 5 people in a cohort, as opposed to most other boot camps, which are pretty much larger. And that gives us to really give one-on-one attention to all of our students. And we go through the projects together, literally hand in hand, and we discuss all the technologies. What you saw right now, because of the time constraint, obviously was more of me just showing pieces of code and you looking at them. But with our students, what we try to do is it's a very hands-on approach where they do all the work, they do all the coding, and we're constantly there with them, guiding them at every step of the process. So it is I would say from an instructor standpoint, it's a very gratifying process, because you could literally see the students grow from a complete beginner. 3 months later, they can create a pretty comprehensive web application on their own, and that's pretty amazing. If you have any other questions, if you guys have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact for Geeks Academy or any of us that work at the Academy on LinkedIn. We're available on LinkedIn. I think Anna already shared with you the social media outlets where you can reach out to the Academy for any questions or for any future events coming up. Please keep in touch, and we'll keep you posted on everything, okay? And we'll be happy to answer any questions about the programs that we have. Have a good night, everyone. Bye-bye.